world also rose during that 2-week period.
There's a lot of coffee.
So much coffee. Hosting a virtual conference is hard, and that's the purpose of today, is to help you all see around those blind corners as you think about hosting your own virtual conferences. And please ask us questions as we go through if we're not hitting on any of those things, but there's also a lot of hope.
So this is our next Ask the Audience, and we want to know what you're most afraid of.
And this can be audio issues, tech issues, potentially, you know, I don't know, maybe you're afraid of heights, or maybe you're afraid of spiders, or potentially even spiders at heights.
That is a real nightmare. Getting great answers in the chat, and I love to see these come through. So Monica said technical outages, and Jen agreed tech issues I can't control. Kim, internet going down. You guys seem like, if you haven't already hosted large virtual events, you know what to be concerned about. Tech issues and panelists picking up the platform and the tech ahead of time was certainly my biggest concern going into Business Unusual. And it's interesting that you say internet going down too, because that seems to be a common issue. Other things coming through, streaming issues, lack of engagement, attendee engagement. Engagement is certainly a buzzword around this, and we're going to spend a decent part of this presentation addressing that. So that's great. Content being not compelling. These are all great answers, you guys.
So clearly from the comment box and just doing this ourselves, we know that this can be a little scary, but there's still a ton of reasons that you can and should do it. And for us going into it, there were some obvious things. We wanted to establish our company and sort of build some brand. We wanted to be able to attract audience that we hadn't already been talking to. And there was a lot of limitations removed. It wasn't like we had to go and secure some big hotel venue to put on a conference and fly speakers in from around the country and world. But we discovered a couple of things that we weren't expecting that we wanted to impart on you. One is we discovered a lot of talents on our own team that we didn't know that these people could do it. In a couple cases, there are speakers from our team who absolutely blew it out of the water, and that's now something that we're continuing to lean into. The other big thing is building authentic relationships, and those are people not just attending, but more so the speakers. Because we were able to have a couple touch points before and after the event itself, we've built really good relationships with organizations and people that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to. And those are at companies like Twitter and Allstate, and companies that if we were to just pick up the phone and call them, wouldn't be answering for click, but they were answering to be a part of this. And that to me is something that is just a hidden benefit that we didn't think about going in, and something for you all to consider too as you're thinking about putting something like this on. And so we know that, sorry, another question here. I got thrown off on the order, classic. That was one of my fears, but why are you all interested in putting on virtual events? Would love to get some more thought there. We listed a bunch of the things that we think are valuable, but it wasn't an exhaustive list. And rather than just put 100 things onto a slide, we wanted to get your inputs on why this is interesting to you and why you showed up here today. And if you're in the wrong place, if you did show up to the wrong thing, this is the point where we're closing the boarding doors. So please raise your hand. One of the flight attendants will come by and escort you to the front. Because it's absolutely necessary financially, expand reach beyond local audience and networks, absolutely, because we have to make money for sure.
It's so true. It's not so much of an option anymore whether people shift to virtual options, and this is a big part of that. So I'm glad that people are not too hesitant to jump in. It sounds like people know it's a necessity.
Absolutely.
Jennifer said build relationships as a team, which is not as intuitive as these other answers, but is so true. What a great answer. I really agree with that.
Absolutely. And something that we noticed as we went through this process, Jessa and I have put on a handful of conferences or events in the physical world, and there's a lot of stuff that's the same. And we'll go through a little bit of that, but there's a lot that's different too. And I think some of the fears that you all were alluding to are absolutely on par.
Oh my gosh. Did his internet just drop? In the middle of this conference of any session that this could happen in. Just kidding. But that is so common for that to happen. So internet issues, even though people know that that's like an obvious thing that could go wrong, it's amazing how prevalent that still is. Michael, I'm so glad you're still here with me because I don't want to do this alone. Another thing that is interesting, I mean, this is a whole list of things that people need to consider in a virtual presentation that they don't necessarily need to consider in real life presentations. So this is a long list. We won't read the whole thing, but one thing that you notice is like a lot of talking heads, and you get speakers that are super engaging in person and they're just a talking head. I mean, like you can use your hands when you're in person and usually you're up against your screen virtually. So physicality is something that's different.
And another thing, there's no audience feedback. I can't tell if that joke of me freezing was funny or if it was a total screecher or dud. And it's really hard as a presenter and for your presenters to go through and give it their all and have to just generate all of their own energy. And there's a ton of other things to be aware of as an organizer that you can guard against, and arming your speakers and getting the right prep done. And we'll go into more on that later.
So this is new to everyone. There is bound to be a learning curve, but if we could do it, you can too. It sounds like you're already sold on the benefits of it. So we hope you kind of lean into the discomfort and go for it.
Absolutely. Everyone is trying to get in this game, and this presentation is focused on helping you be successful. There's a lot of noise out there too, and because everybody's sort of just diving in, there's an ocean of stuff that's bad quality, just doesn't make the impact that you want it to, and that's what we're going to go through here today.
So next up, we're just going to take a high-level view of the process for planning a virtual event. This is 1 through 10 steps, and a lot of these overlap with in-person events, but we're going to really zoom in on the steps that are specific to virtual and the steps that our tips could kind of help you avoid some pitfalls or help your virtual event go more smoothly. So we highlighted those steps that we're going to dive into, and you'll kind of see this as an outline for the rest of this session.
So first things first, it's totally different. And like I said, you're not going to go and find a hotel with a ballroom that you get a stage and lights and host it there. Instead, you have to select a platform. We're going to go through some of those tools now. But first, let's talk about some things to think about when selecting them. There's a ton of different platforms, like I said, so it's good to first think about what your constraints and requirements are. The first thing that we think is super important is just how tech savvy your audience is. Some of these platforms are really awesome with tech support. Some of them are only really good for self-serve, and their features are a whole lot more simple. And because of that, there's different engagement opportunities. But if you have an audience that you know isn't very tech savvy, it might just make sense to do something they're already familiar with and just do your best to engage them through that familiar channel, as opposed to getting the most whiz bang thing and not having anybody be able to engage because they can't figure it out.
Another thing to consider when you're looking at platforms is whether you're looking to facilitate networking. So the answer doesn't have to be yes, but some platforms cater to that really well. And If we move to the next slide, you can see this is remote. Denver Startup Week, I believe, is actually using this. So this emulates actual tables at a conference. You can see who's at the table before joining it, and then you can have more intimate conversations and actually get to know those people. If that's right for your event, definitely consider it as you're looking at platforms. And the other thing is, what level of interaction with your audience is best going to support your content? Usually we think more interaction is better, but just consider the features that they have, whether it's raising your hand, polls. There's a whiteboard feature that's really cool on some. In that case, attendees can type in their answer and it shows up directly on the deck. Zoom has a feature called Annotate that does that really well.
And you also want to consider what the experience is going to be like. Is it something where you're like Denver Startup Week, where there's a lot of things going on simultaneously and you want it to be really easy for participants to jump in and out of different stages? Does there need to be a virtual booth or a virtual lobby, places where people can hang out and network? And these are just things that some software accommodates, some do not. And go ahead, Jess.
So like I mentioned with the Remo slide, that kind of facilitates some serendipitous interactions, not completely serendipitous, of course, but more so than if you were just joining a Zoom webinar. So this is Justin. He's just kind of emphasizing that. Different platforms will facilitate some serendipity, other platforms won't. One thing to keep in mind is some of these platforms try to just recreate real life in a virtual space. And Michael and I work for a digital design company, so we're especially sensitive to, it's not always best to just recreate in real life. Things are different and better virtually in some cases. So I'll let Michael speak more to that, but it's just a consideration to keep in mind.
Yeah, just another thing to take into account is if you need to facilitate sponsorship. There's different ways to do it. I think Denver Startup Week has done an incredible job with the intro videos they have and paying their dues to those sponsors. Some platforms will actually allow you to put banner ads in intermissions or at the bottom of a video that's going on. And some platforms, like Jessa was alluding to, have done a really good job at thinking about how to amplify digital and use the best traits that digital offer to give value to their sponsors, while some haven't done any thinking and others have done what in the design world we call skeuomorphism and are just replicating the sort of exhibitor hall that you've seen in real life. And that's just sort of cringy when you're doing it that way and doesn't optimize the opportunity for your sponsors.
So cringy. Also consider what amount of branding you need. So this is about whether the platform allows for a custom landing page. We have an example of Tech Week's custom branded landing page. And if that's something that works for you, look for that on the features of the platform that you're vetting.
Now to some specific platforms. This isn't an exhaustive list, and I see that Brian has already jumped in front of our next question, which is what are some platforms you're considering? But real quickly, I'll highlight BigMarker, which is what we used for Business Unusual, and that one is awesome. It has a lot of really cool sponsor features. It has features for attendees to engage, and just really one of the best ones for it. Clients of ours, actually, SpotMe, has built a bunch of features and functionality that bolt on top of Zoom and WebEx and other platforms that you're used to that allow for networking, activity feed, things like that. And then some of these other ones that you may or may not have heard of. I'm not gonna go through the rest of them. If you want this list, take a quick screenshot, and I'll leave it here and just tell you what the next question is so you have a chance to get that screenshot if you want it. But what other platforms are you hearing of or considering, and just share those so that we can get a bigger list and something that we didn't want to just have, again, a list of 100 different platforms. But if there's any that you've heard of, feel free to share those with your fellow attendees.
Yeah, and of course, we all know that Denver Startup Week is using Zoom. So that kind of jumps back to what Michael said at the beginning, which is how tech savvy is your audience? Denver Startup Week's audience is probably on the more tech savvy side, but Zoom is so familiar to people that it just kind of gets rid of the barrier to entry for some people. And it seems to be working great. It looks like Jim said, hey, Summit. Jen said they're going to use Freestone and Go Expo and YM. These are things I haven't heard of yet.
And it looks like
Catherine
Sandra.
has used Easy Expo.
Yeah, and Sandra sounds like has used Spot Me for a long time, which originally was a physical engagement app for conferences and events. And Miro, love Miro. I think that's such a cool thing to integrate into sessions around that need to be workshops and get some really high engagement. With Miro, I bet you'd have to couple that with some sort of video platform so you get that audio, but really think that's a cool idea, Sandra, and other folks. If you haven't checked out Miro, it's one of the most robust whiteboarding tools, digital whiteboarding tools there is. And yeah, Patrick noted that Zoom streams with Vimeo. A lot of these platforms do offer streaming for high capacity events. I know that for Big Marker, if we cross the 15,000 person threshold, then it would start simulcasting to whatever other platform that we wanted to. And Freestone, just learning management, but Find, Gather, and I'm gonna move on, but there's a lot of these, and I encourage you all to check some of these out. I know tools can get boring, but also be exciting. So wanted to make sure that we allowed you all to sort of put those out there for your fellow attendees.
So the next thing that we're going to kind of dig into is how to build your agenda and what to think about as you're doing it. The first thing is probably the part that deviates most from in real life conferences, and that's that you should keep your keynotes short and sweet. So short that they could be 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And that's just because attention spans are different and you can get some great content in that amount of time. So this is a screenshot of TED, and these are their most popular videos. You'll see that all these videos are between 8 and 20 minutes.
Yeah, and keep in mind, TED is what you're competing against. You're competing for people's attention on the internet, on their computer screens. And if you have these long 3-hour keynotes, nobody's going to want to sit through that when they can go and get their motivation they need from something like TED. The next one is panels. It gets really hard when there's more than 3 or 4 people. I've been to in-person conferences where you have 8 people lined up on a stage, and it's pretty easy for them to navigate who's supposed to be talking because you get the benefit of no latency, no lag, and also actual body language. I can see Jessa, but I don't know how much lag there is between what I'm doing and saying and if she's trying to cut in. More is definitely not the merrier here. Keep it tight and it'll go a whole lot better. Next thing here is to mix it up. You want to create sort of a river or an ebb and flow of what different content is and how it sort of daisy chains together so that you're not just sitting through a block of keynotes and then a block of panels and then a block of firesides. The variety helps people sort of work through and have a sense of motion and also just not glaze their eyes over.
And the next thing is energy is so important virtually. So especially when you choose your moderators, choose someone with really high energy who's not afraid to get excited even in their own living room like we're doing today. And somebody who's more seasoned at moderating virtual panels will help you too, because you have to be a little more explicit about switching from speaker to speaker or panelist to panelist. That helped us a lot. Our star sessions at Business Unusual were those that had really high energy moderators and panelists.
Yeah, and shout out to Dave Bacon, Christy LaPlante, and who am I forgetting, Jessa?
Amanda McLernan was amazing. Ryan Harris, who's doing a lot of moderating here at Denver Startup Week. Absolute superstars at Business Unusual. It was such a pleasure to watch them do their thing.
Yeah, and it was a tribute to their energy and also just their adeptness in navigating those different people interjecting. And Laura, it looks like you have a question. What is a fireside? Sorry, that's just an interview where you have a moderator interviewing one person. So kind of similar to what you hear about in a podcast, but I think it gets its name because when these first started coming out on TV, it would be that cheesy scene where there's two men sitting next to a fire and one is interviewing the other. So conferences sometimes just call that style of content a fireside chat still.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize we had actual footage of me in here. This is back when I was planning Business Unusual with Michael and trying to build our schedule. So you can see I had it for a minute, but man, it fell apart. And that is just because when you're trying to manage 40 people and consider who should speak on which topic, and then of course be accommodating of their personal schedules, try to fit in a last minute session. It is a lot of juggling. This is an actual screenshot of part of our schedule, and we're happy to share this template with you. It's a great starting point. The schedule is actually really fun to make. It just was a bit of a juggling act.
If you want a copy to this, just connect with us on LinkedIn or shoot us a private message here or send us an email. Now that we've gotten through all of that, one of the most important things is promoting your event. And there's a lot of crossover here to physical events. It's hard to get people to come, and what's the point of doing it if nobody's there? One of the most effective ways that we found was just leveraging existing communities, things that already had an audience that wanted to hear the types of topics that we'd be talking about, and going there and recruiting those people and just sort of leveraging Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, places that people were already looking for that information, and we were just the solution to their problem.
Doing that has helped us so much. So I think it's kind of obvious to people for their first step to be maybe to promote it to their entire email list. And in our experience, it's just less successful than finding people where they've already opted into wanting this type of content. So a recent example of that is we host virtual roundtables for marketing leaders. And we got that audience together. A simple post in a Facebook group with marketers advertising the roundtable got over 100 people saying they want to be involved. And that's because they were there because they want to learn from other marketers. So it just is a matter of working smarter and not harder in terms of your promotion. Definitely.
The next thing is being really personal and doing the sort of annoying hard work of reaching out to people on an individual basis, whether that's on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or just through email. If you're getting to a point where your mass marketing efforts aren't working, this has been the most reliable thing we've seen. The important thing is you're not just spamming people, but you're reaching out to them and helping solve their problem by delivering that content. Hey, I thought you'd be interested because of X, Y, Z. We've seen a really good, that's been really effective, but it's also been good at helping start relationships too. And the next thing here that worked well for Business Unusual was just humanizing speakers. And I'm gonna show you a quick example of what that looked like for us with some of our speakers.
John Zaratsky here with a quick note about a fireside chat I'm going to be doing soon at a virtual conference called Business Unusual.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy, Ryan Harris.
Hey, everyone. My name is Amanda Cupido, and I'm representing PCI.
Hi, I'm the Managing Director at Deitzer.
Hi, I'm Joanna Kanakis, a Director of Enterprise Sales at Halo Investing.
Hi, my name is Henry, and this is my mom, Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz Cannonberg. I'm a creative director at Sprout Social, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about how brands are having to shift strategy and create different kinds of content in the midst of COVID-19.
So just to give you a quick sense, won't stick on there too much, but being virtual has sort of changed people's perceptions on how these things can come to life. And we found it to be super, super helpful to bring out people's humanity as opposed to hide from it. You can see Jessa's background there, got some awesome pictures. Mine's a little more boring with just the door behind me. But in something that we actually heard in the most recent roundtable we hosted, which we cheated a little bit for this session, was how to host virtual events and conferences. Somebody there suggested taking pictures with your speakers where they have their pets and things like that. And that worked really well for us. I don't know if you were able to see, but this post that I posted just personally had over 2,000 views and a lot of comments and whatever these things here are called, the like button. That's not common for me, and it worked really well just for this specific event.
Another thing you could try is some win-win co-marketing. So an example of that would be when you register for our conference, you'll get sent a discount code for some % off a bottle of wine at a local winery. So if wine is something you think would be appreciated by your target audience, then that would be a great win-win, because you might get people who feel more incentivized to register, and the winery might get more exposure and some business out of that. And you could also try activating your attendees by presenting a challenge. So that would look something like, if you tag us in a social media post ahead of the event, you'll be entered to win a spot at like an intimate Zoom with a keynote speaker. So that could be a 5 to 10 person, 30-minute Zoom. And that's a pretty low lift, but might incentivize people to start promoting on your behalf.
Yeah, and I should mention now, if you go and click on social media right now, you'll be entered to win a Ferrari. And if you don't understand that's a joke, then I feel sorry, and you'll be disappointed.
Let's just see. Give it a try, you guys. Tag us on social media, and we'll see.
The next thing, because this is virtual, and I was out in a conference in Miami this time last year, and it was really easy to go back the next day because I was physically stuck. In this case, congrats to everybody who have showed up for what is now the 4th day of Denver Startup Week. Sometimes it can be a challenge to get people to come back. Probably half of the people who were at Business Unusual day 2 didn't come to day 1, and vice versa. It was about the same number day 1 to day 2, but the audience was totally different, which is cool. But there's also an opportunity there to drive some more people to come back. And this is similar to what Jessa was talking about around the wine and co-marketing thing. But you can either buy people lunch on that day 2 through Grubhub, or you can give some sort of Grubhub credit if people come to both days. Both interesting ideas, and you're not paying for food like you typically would at a conference. So this is just one of those supplemental things that where you're saving money on an in-person conference, you could really enhance the experience and encourage people to be more engaged. So that brings us to our next question. What are your questions? What are your ideas for promotions if we missed any? But this can be as broad or general or specific as you want, specific to promotions, or general to just anything that we've talked about or haven't talked about so far.
Yeah, we'll give you guys a minute to enter questions. Any questions you have thus far, feel free to enter them. Feel free to stand up and stretch if you want to. I've been standing this whole time, which feels pretty good compared to my normal day. It doesn't look like we have any new questions, so we will dig into the next thing, which is, well, we just got a question. Let's see. Barbara says we provide recipes to prepare in advance, which would be mocktails or cocktails for virtual happy hours with someone to teach them how to prep. I love that idea, Barbara. That's so fun.
Yeah.
Carol said, what are your, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that could be a really cool thing to partner with Drizzly on to make sure everybody has the ingredients they need.
Carol asked a great question. She said, what are your thoughts regarding appealing to introverts or extroverts?
That is a wonderful question, and one that's I don't know how to answer in real life either. I think the best thing, and if this is for speakers, I think you just have to sort of cater to the type of format they're comfortable speaking in. Introverts, I think, and this is just a hypothesis, might be better suited for something like a fireside, where they don't have to try to compete to jump in edgewise with the other panelists. But they also don't have to take the full pressure of carrying a presentation like you would in a keynote. As far as audience goes, I think that would really be platform dependent. And when I say platform dependent, if you're able to do those breakout sessions for networking, I actually think it'd be easier for an introvert to sort of network in that format than just walking around a ballroom with a drink and hoping that they somehow like talk to somebody, or vice versa. And I think for extroverts, I think it might actually be more challenging for participants as an extrovert, where you want to be able to raise your hand and ask that question, and instead of just sort of putting it into a Zoom chat or otherwise. So having the functionality where you can call on them and let them take over the screen and participate in a more interactive way might be a really good thing to think about there. And then towing the line, being able to offer some of both, and just keeping that in mind. And it sounds like Barbara worked with Bar Helix and provided a comedian intro, which is awesome. Barbara, you may have gotten a copy of our deck in advance. Thanks for spoiling it. I'm just kidding. What the biggest challenge was that we had to overcome to make the virtual event successful. I asked Jessa this a week ago as we were preparing this, because we really wanted to make sure we could answer that. And I think, well, my answer for it is it's just a lot of different moving pieces, and it's sort of foreign if you've put on a conference in the physical space. But the tech and sort of speaker prep and the nuance there was probably the biggest challenge for me. I think that's what, Jessa, any other?
Yeah, I think in our experience, it was kind of like not knowing what you don't know, and those realizations coming to us as we went with considerations we needed to make in a virtual space. And on that note, we're happy to share all of these notes so that you, if you're not taking notes right now, so that you have those on hand as you're preparing stuff. That is a great question. I think that there's also potentially a misconception that virtual conference planning is easier than in-conference planning, because it doesn't have booking the venue and getting people to travel. They're different, but I would say it's not easier. And the people who are planning Denver Startup Week would probably agree with that.
Right. And Tanya, I don't know what the best low-cost platform is. We're coming as this not as experts in putting these on for clients. We're coming to this as we did this and we learned a lot along the way, and we want to share that with you all. But I would recommend looking at Big Marker. I think Zoom offers a pretty good solution. I don't know what it costs though. But I think, and if you go back a little further in the chat, there's a lot of other tools on there that you can check out, and you'd have to price. The last thing I'll say there, I just remembered this, SpotMe actually put together like a grid that has all of the features of a bunch of different platforms on there. And I think it might include the price. I might be wrong, but we, at the end when we're doing Q&A, I'll see if I can track that down and put it into the chat. Let's see. Just making sure that didn't miss any of these. It looks like we got through all those questions. So let's keep going forward.
Let's keep going. So the next thing is prepping your speakers, and this is no small task. The first thing that's probably an obvious requirement is making sure that they have the platform training that they need. And I think the way that we recommend approaching this is scheduling 30-minute to 60-minute training sessions in the week leading up to the event. And it's helpful to do it in that week leading up, because then it's still top of mind for people. When you get farther out, likely it will just be forgotten. So schedule those. You can have as many speakers on one training session as you'd like. It doesn't have to be a one-on-one by any means. Of course, speakers will have busy schedules, or they'll have things come up. So you have to have backup. A good backup for that is 20 minutes before a session is scheduled to start, have a person from your team, or it could be you, there to do the troubleshooting and to answer the questions. We did that at Business Unusual, and it might sound risky or sketchy. It worked really well. We also recorded some of those live sessions that we did with people and sent those to all of our speakers, even speakers who attended, so that they could reference that ahead of time and kind of at their leisure.
And Denver Startup Week is doing this 5 minutes before our session. We were able to hop on and ask a couple questions and make sure that everything was lined up. And there's one of the benefits of doing this platform training. There's a lot of idiosyncrasies in some of these different software tools. A quick story from Business Unusual. Right before a session was starting, one of the panelists actually hit end session. And so the Business Unusual support team had to actually help us spin up a fully new session, and it ended up making us start 5 minutes late. And so it's just helpful for those speakers to get a little bit more exposure. So that only happened once, and hopefully for you all, it won't ever happen, but just to drive home the importance of doing that.
We're not bitter about it. We won't name any names.
Yeah.
Winter.
Yeah. No
Just
name.
kidding.
The next thing is just setting expectations with speakers. They should know what the outcome of a session is and be able to drive toward that. You don't want it to turn into a commercial or a demo or something where it's too self-serving. Speakers should get some value and benefit from it, but it's something that you just want to make sure they know the abstract. And in a couple cases, we didn't do a good enough job of driving that home, and the sessions sort of reflected that. And you can put the onus on the moderators to prep the panelists. That's something that worked really, really well for us. And we had a couple moderators who just really relished in that and used it as an opportunity to build some great relationships.
Another thing you can consider is pre-recorded sessions. These might sound easier, but actually they take a little more time because people will want to retry their answers or retry their questions. And there's, of course, some post-production to that. But it is nice because it takes away some of the uncertainty on the day of your conference if some of those are already dialed in. So running the show, this is when the day of your event is finally here and you haven't slept in weeks. And we'll also talk about getting people engaged in this section as well. So we kind of mentioned it, have a dedicated logistics person. This is the person in the backstage. We have a backstage Denver Startup Week person with us today. Thank you so much. So if anything goes wrong, that's the person who puts the fire out.
They're also the ones that tell us we have 5 minutes left.
Yep.
The next thing, it's super helpful to have somebody that's dedicated on your team that's there to moderate comments. That also helps encourage everyone to give their own comments. Something that we sort of stumbled into with Business Unusual is having somebody from our team there who was just participating and being overly participatory, because it made it more comfortable for everyone else to start putting their comments in as well. And the next thing is actually, again, just pushing people to chat and to ask questions. This is a big differentiator from TED Talks, where on TED, yeah, sure, I can go watch Simon Sinek tell me the value of why you start with why, but I can't ask Simon any questions.
So small groups for the win. This was a huge thing that we heard at our roundtables. People appreciated so much when conferences had the ability to break out into breakout rooms. The best way that works is to have 6 to 9 people in a breakout room and give them enough time to get to know each other and chat about whatever the topic of the session is or the topic of the conference is. So that'd be like 20 to 30 minutes in a breakout room. It seems to be like a differentiating and memorable factor for people who've attended a number of virtual conferences. Winner, winner, you could do a giveaway for people who are participating. So this keeps them engaged. At the beginning, you could say something like, introduce yourself, tell us your favorite restaurant. You'll be entered to win something. And then at the end, you could say something like, Michael, you just won $200 to your favorite restaurant, Applebee's. And we're so happy you stuck with us for the whole event.
Man, I'm going to get a bloomin' onion. Oh, wait, Outback. The next three, this goes in line with comments and questions. Do polls, ask questions, ask people to annotate, whatever you can to get people engaged. You're going to have a more captive audience and they're going to appreciate it for you, or appreciate it because of that.
So the last thing that we're digging into is how to stand out. Like we said, a lot of conferences are happening and you want yours to be the most value add. You want it to be the most fun, the most entertaining, the most memorable. So these are some tips for that.
What is this? Did you add this?
No. Just take a minute. Oh.
That was weird.
Oh. It's far too short.
Something you can do to break things up, inject a little energy, be a little silly, is something like a dance break. This was just a fun way for Jessa and I to dance. I hope you joined in, but I'm going to cruise the next slide since we're getting close. And that also sort of makes my point. Get to the point. Because people's attention is being drug a bunch of different ways and people are tired of being on Zoom calls, it's beneficial to just sort of do what the opposite of what we just did in some cases and just say what you want to say.
So taking it back to music, music is such a fun way to get people kind of energized. And I don't know if you've attended any virtual events yet that start with kind of high vibe music, but there's always 2 or 3 or 4 minutes where people are joining. Turn on some fun music and get people feeling good at the outset. And if anyone on your team is a musician, get them to play the music.
Yeah, and Barbara agrees. And Sandra, I love the picture scavenger hunts or games during and throughout. That's awesome. Another one, and somebody said they had a comedian come to theirs. Another thing would just getting a motivational speaker who has different content than what you're offering to sort of just mix things up and give something that's different and a mental break because of that. And the last, and this is, again, Justin, he runs a video conference, or sorry, a virtual event platform, and he's seen a ton of these. The most important thing to remember is don't try to be all things to all people. If you have a purpose for your call or your conference, really try to hone in on that and answer to that and tune everything for that. And with that.
And this is a QR code back for our newsletter. We also host a ton of free educational and networking events. Our next one is a virtual roundtable coming up on this Wednesday about building community online. I would love to have you guys there. As I said, those are super fun. So just ask me on LinkedIn to add you to that invite list.
Yep, and here again, you can do that here. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you to Jessa's or my LinkedIn. And we are Click Studios. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. This was wonderful. I know we have a hard stop at 1:55, so please, 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 if you have questions, this is the best way. Find us on LinkedIn, find us at Click Studios, and we are happy, happy, happy to answer any of those questions.
So happy. Thank you all, and thank you to everyone who made Denver Startup Week possible. We are impressed.